Hello and welcome. It is time for the Phil Talk Sports Podcast.
Okay, it's that time again. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Phil Talk Sports. Today is Wednesday, November 6th, 2019. Hope you guys had a great weekend. Hope all your teams won. I myself was having a pretty decent sports weekend. We had UCF and Houston in the early kickoff, noon kickoff game. UCF space uniforms looked out of this world, pun very much intended. Very close first half, actually down at the half, and then picked it up. Only allowed, I think, 6 points in the second half. Cruised to a comfortable win after that. And then, the next slate of games are coming up, and you have Florida State, Miami, and then you have Florida and Georgia in the largest cocktail party or whatever they call that game. It was kind of sucked that they were on at the same time. That's not something that tends to happen. But it was, it was kind of fun switching back and forth. Both games really didn't get going until the second half. But overall, Florida took the L to Georgia, and Florida State lost their game to Miami, which, aside from their game against Florida, is always, the most important game on the schedule. And it definitely got me thinking, what's going to happen. This is the second year in a row Florida State isn't really where they have been historically and where fans and boosters and everyone else expects them to be. And I was wondering if this was going to be the game that was the last one Willie Taggart coaches at Florida State. And as it turns out, I think by the end of that day, it might have been the morning after, news came out, Willie Taggart no longer the head coach of Florida State. So, I had to get my friends on the phone. Richard Thayer joins me here in a minute. He's former marching chief. I did a whole episode with him. Diehard Florida State fan and alumni, giving his thoughts on where they go from here. So we're going to jump to that in just a second. Richard will give you all his insight, and I'll throw a little bit on there. The only thing, overall, I think it's warranted. Some people, the argument is that it's a little too soon when you look at it, just on paper, not even 2 full years. I think it was 21 games. He had a win-loss record of 9-12, which I don't think gets it done just about anywhere. The only thing that truly bothered me about this is some people are kind of putting it, and I don't get political on the show. This might be the most political thing you ever hear me say, but for people to think it was due to race or, race inclusive or whatnot, that he was given such a short leash, I just think it's ludicrous. Yeah, Florida State hasn't had a minority head coach in a while, but that's, a lot of that is contributing to Bobby Bowden being there as long as he has. And a lot of people compare it to, Scott Frost at Nebraska isn't having that great of a start. The difference with him is he is like the golden boy at Nebraska, and while it might ultimately not work out, because so far that's the way it's looking, they're not willing to admit they're wrong this soon. I actually tip my hat to Florida State admitting that, okay, maybe we made the wrong call here. Maybe we have to move on and find who's going to be the true successor and to bring this program back to its prominence as the dominant force in the ACC. Obviously, Clemson's going to have a lot to say with that. But even being, the second best team in the ACC is leaps and bounds better than what they are now. And we actually mentioned that later on in the show. But I just wanted to throw out there that, the race issues involved with Taggart, I think is laughable. I think it's ludicrous. I don't think it had anything to do with him being let go. Really, at the end of the day, you got to perform. I mean, I've always felt that if you're losing games big, if you're losing by 2, 3, 4 touchdowns, 24, 28 points, a lot of that will come down to talent. The other team is just going to have more talent than you sometimes in college football. The talent, there's 132 teams in Division I. You're just going to get those games that, when you're building your way back up, that you're going to have, issues where they're just that much more talented than you. And then when you lose games by a possession or two, or not even two, if you lose by a possession or less consistently, I put that on coaching, because that means you're right there. The talent has put you in the game. It is then up to you to make things happen. Obviously, this year was great with that. Great first game, first half against Boise. First half went great. Boise comes back and win. They botched what would have been probably his best win as head coach, losing to ranked Virginia by a score. Last year they lost to Miami Hurricanes by 1 point in, a comeback that they kind of blew that lead. Those are the things you can look at and say that's the coaching. And that's the reason I think Willie Taggart is no longer there. So we're about to jump in here. Me and Richard were talking about how he felt about the whole thing, why he thinks it happened. and who the potential candidate might be. As of today, nothing has come out yet. We plan to do another episode when they do finally decide. I have heard since that it's a decision that'll be made within the month, which to me sounds pretty obvious, but until then, Coach Odell is going to have to hold it down, and I wish them luck, man. I've always, appreciated Florida State. They're one of the staples of college football, and even as a UCF fan, I've gone to plenty of Florida State games, had a lot of friends that went there, Richard included, obviously. But overall, I want them to do better, and this is going to be a very pressing decision, and we'll see if they can make the right one this time. And like I said, hats off to them to figuring out that what they're doing isn't working and doing what it takes to change it. So with all that being said, please enjoy Richard and I's breakdown of everything that's gone down. All right, joining me now to talk about the big news in college football, former FSU marching chief and Florida State alumni, Richard Thayer. Thanks for coming back, man. How do you feel about this whole thing?
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's definitely been a disappointing season. My honest opinion on this whole situation right now is that the university moved far too quick in coming to this decision, but I understand why the decision was made. So it's a situation where I see both sides of it, but I think ultimately in the long run, we're never going to know what could have been in year 3 or how close this team was to really turning it around. But the fact is, the administration at FSU and the fans had largely felt that Taggart had run out of time to prove he could handle coaching at Florida State.
See, I think most people are in one of two camps. Usually people are like, this was a good move or this was a bad move. Most people are like, we needed to do this, the time was now. And then other people are kind of, what I feel like your take is, not so much that you were like a big Taggart guy, but it's like it might have been too soon. I mean, when you look at it from that standpoint, like it's been a year and a half, a total of 21 games with a 9-12 record. Is it possible that they think if they get rid of him now, they have basically the rest of the year to find the candidate that they want? Do you think they think that getting the head start on the coaching carousel would be the reason for that?
Yeah, all the reading I've been doing so far as to the decisions behind it and what FSU athletic director David Coburn has revealed is that he believes and the administration believes that there was no advantage into keeping Taggart through the end of the season, even going so far as to say that even going 6-6 would not have been enough to save Taggart's job, even if he had pulled off a couple more wins this season. And especially with the early signing period coming up in December, just a month away now, they felt like it was in their best interest to open the position up and get a head start on the coaching carousel and being one of the first big-name offers out there for any aspiring coach that wanted to prove they could handle it, or possibly attract a big-name coach that would be willing to move to a bigger program. So I think it serves that purpose pretty well. So from that standpoint, it's a fairly smart move for the university in terms of getting a head start on rebuilding and truly getting the program back to where they want it and need it to be, quite frankly. But at the same time, I'm still kind of on the side of, I think, even though things did not look good, I still think Taggart needed year 3 to really get his guys on the field, get his players that he recruited on the field, and see what actual fresh recruits could do for the program. Because his former, if I remember, he coached with the Harbaughs at Stanford. And they didn't have the greatest start at Stanford either. Actually, they started out with the exact same record as Taggart did in the first 2 seasons, 9-12. And then in year 3, they broke out and had a winning record. In year 4, they were 12-1 and playing in the Orange Bowl. Or one of them, I can't remember for certain. But, you go from a dismal start like that at Stanford to 12-1, playing in one of the big New Year's 6 bowl games just in a matter of 4 years. And I think the patience wasn't there, and I think too many people made too much noise and waved too much money around in FSU's face for it to ignore. I think that's ultimately what happened.
Yeah, see, I think, like, the first year, he looked like a deer in the headlights. He looked like someone not qualified to coach at this level. But I think, look from an outside perspective, games I watched, in this second year, he didn't look outclassed. He just looked on a regular level of, like, outcoached. Like, he's really, in all honesty, between his 9-12 record, he is, if he beats Miami last year, you know, where they blew the lead, you know, if they beat Virginia early this year, that was a 1-point loss. If they found a way to beat Miami this year, it really only would have taken 2 to 3 kind of signature wins, and this probably isn't even a conversation. So really, you know, I tried to break it down myself. What would his biggest, you know, signature win be? He beat Louisville 2 straight years. He beat Boston College last year, which was a ranked team. They beat NC State. The most recent win against Syracuse, which I don't know if you were able to catch that game, where that was basically Cam Akers do everything game. Some people were happy about that, and I could immediately tell, like, this is a guy coaching for his job. He's throwing, you know, everything in but the kitchen sink, and if you were to do that, you probably should have waited to do that against Miami, because a win against Miami probably saves your job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think you needed to throw the house at Syracuse to win that game.
Would you agree that they did, though?
I would say breaking out the Wild Cat, or as they called it, the Wild Cam formation for the Syracuse game gave Miami too much time to prepare for that.
Definitely.
And all it did was serve to pile on top of an already struggling Syracuse defense. I mean, yes, it accounted for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns, but even taking 2 touchdowns off the board, FSU was still handily in control of that game up until garbage time, where the backups were in, and Syracuse got a couple touchdowns late, but there was no way they were going to come back and win that game anyway. I think the problem is that when you start doing stuff like that, it's great to practice it in a game scenario, but like you said, don't do it the week before you play one of your biggest rivals and give away one of the best options you had at surprising them on the offensive side of the ball. Especially with as well as Miami's defense is playing, because if you give them time to prepare for something, I mean, they're in the top 20 in defensive efficiency, even at this point in the season, even with their record. So it's not like Miami's defense is bad. Their offense was like ours. It has talent. It just can't get off the ground, but it didn't look like it really had trouble against FSU this past weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Miami
I think that was kind of a mistake to bring that kind of ace up the sleeve, I guess you could say, out and give Miami a week to prepare for it.
Yeah, I mean, Miami they looked better overall than Florida State. I think we can say that, but I think they weren't so much better that had they been able to surprise them with that offense, that game wouldn't have been closer, and, you know, Florida State would have had the opportunity to get the win. And obviously the other big thing, you know, since that was announced, from what I heard, that really the rumbling started after the loss at Wake Forest, and they just kind of waited a little bit longer at least. But the other big thing everyone's talking about is this buyout that was for $17 million, which apparently has even been rounded up to 20, and how, you know, people that did feel bad for Taggart don't feel bad nearly as much when they found out, you know, what he's walking away with.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that sentiment going around. The rumor is that Florida State's boosters and their connections all cobbled together $20 million. It was all privately funded. There's no real one source for it. And, of course, the administration denies that it was raised, you know, to buy out Taggart and any of his coaches that don't remain. But, you know, it's awfully weird and awfully specific timing for $20 million just to appear in funding for a university that had an embattled head coach with a nearly $20 million buyout. So,
see, that's the one thing I don't fully believe. Like, you know, people tried saying that, you know, with the Gators, that they just, this money magically appeared. You know, the more research I'm doing is FSU is looking to, and this might be a bigger issue down the line, they're looking to upgrade their football facilities and their athletic facilities as a whole. What they really did is got the approval from the people that donated that money to redirect it into this buyout, which could ultimately delay some of these advancements in the facilities, which is a race that FSU is already starting to fall behind on in general. So, I agree. The idea that $20 million just appeared because, 10 to 12 boosters were mad enough about it, I think is ludicrous. I don't think that's what happened. But I think ultimately it could impact, the improvement of the facilities moving forward.
Yeah. And that's definitely the case. I mean, the athletic department had already allocated $60 million for what they dubbed an elite football training facility. It's just part of the football arms race. And, it wasn't really talked about too much the past couple of years because the focus has been on Taggart. Is he the man for the job? Can he get the Noles back to national relevance? And the answer through not even a full 2 seasons has been he could, but it doesn't look like it's happening. And Florida State was already starting to lose the arms race shortly after the national championship in 2013 because the football facilities just quite frankly hadn't been upgraded or added to in a long time. But places like Ohio State, Texas A&M, Clemson, and even some lower tier programs were starting to invest multiple millions of dollars into their football training facilities. And they did that in order to keep up with the latest trends and technology to help give their players an edge in any way, shape, or form, and to attract, higher level talent. Because, if you're up to date and you've got the best that there is out there, that's a draw factor for all kinds of talent, especially the top level talent. Because, your blue chip recruits aren't going to go to some rinky-dink school that doesn't have what it takes to keep up with everybody else. They're going to want to know they're in a program that has the facilities that are going to allow them to be the best player they possibly can be. Yeah. And that was one of Jimbo's biggest gripes with the administration, is that they constantly fought him on putting more money into the training facility or the football facilities in general. And that was one of the big reasons why Jimbo bolted for Texas A&M. Well, that and a $75 million payday certainly helps.
Yeah, that'll definitely do it. And I mean, me and you have talked about it before. I never looked at him going to A&M as a improvement as far as job status. At most, it would be a lateral movement. And like you said, the big deal is Texas A&M is in a situation where they were willing to upgrade their facilities, which is something, of course, Jimbo Fisher thought was important. And to be fair, he was right. But I think the only other aspect of this that hasn't get talked about is when you take Clemson away, for several years, the SEC was Bama, maybe LSU, and then everybody else. Right now, the ACC is Clemson and everyone else. So when you take Clemson away, the ACC is wide open. I think a lot of people at FSU thought there's no reason we can't be the second best team in our conference. It might be a distant second, but they had this goal of being, when FSU was on top for the longest time, Clemson was, the top three was maybe Clemson and Virginia Tech, and that was kind of the hierarchy. So as wide open as this conference is, I think people look at the way it's going, and they're like, other than Clemson, nobody in this conference isn't, not beatable. So to be where they are, kind of at the lower end of an already, floundering conference, I think was also the final nail in the coffin.
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at an ACC that is actually starting to find some identity from its middle-tier teams. I mean, you look at Wake Forest, they're 7-1. They just got done beating the absolute crap out of NC State this past weekend. I think that game was 44-10 by the end of it. You also look at Virginia and Virginia Tech as two teams that have sort of solidified their position atop the Coastal. And even Pitt has sort of shown that it's a gutsier, stronger football team than some people would have you believe. But the Atlantic Division has been locked up by Florida State or by Clemson for the better part of a past decade or more at this point. And that doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. The Coastal's wide open, but you're right. If Florida State doesn't return back to national prominence and you take Clemson out of the conversation, the ACC quickly becomes the weakest player in the conversation. But that's like taking Oregon out of the Pac-12. Who do you have left, really? So I think the ACC needs Florida State to get back and do its thing and be a dominant team again and help the conference be in the national spotlight more. But as a whole, I mean, Dave Clawson's doing great things there at Wake Forest, and Virginia and Virginia Tech are certainly getting back to some of their winning ways, Virginia Tech more so. So I think it's going to be interesting to see where FSU goes from here.
And yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to see, if not Florida State, who will the team be to become the second, flag bearer for that conference. Maybe Virginia Tech historically has been in that role, but it'll be interesting to see if Florida State will be able to do that. Obviously, one of the biggest pieces of information that'll go into answering that question is who the next head coach is, and the rumor mill is already, flying off the handle. To me, there's a couple different tiers. There's, people shooting for the moon. These are guys like Rich Franklin at Penn State. I don't see him going anywhere. I think it's a joke that Urban Meyer has even been mentioned in this conversation. You look at a guy like Bob Stoops, who there was a point when I thought by the time I got you on the line here that we were talking about Bob Stoops as the new head coach, because for like 2 or 3 hours today, it looked like it was a done deal. And as it appears, the only thing he's admitted is that he's spoken with them. He's intrigued, but he's not, committed on any level. He currently, if things stay the way they are, he's actually coaching in the XFL, the Dallas franchise this year. Another guy I think that's interesting is Lane Kiffin, who, in a weird way I could see, but to me that's hiring Willie Taggart all over again. Those are just some of the names that I've heard. None of them jump out to me. Maybe if Bob Stoops wants it, I think it's his job. But if he doesn't, I think we're pretty wide open here.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I would say Bob Stoops is the biggest name on the board. I mean, he compiled a 190-48 record while at Oklahoma, won a championship over FSU in that time for 2000. And he's just a guy that he's proven he can win a lot at the top level of football. And so I think FSU would be mistaken not to give him plenty of reasons to be here. I mean, yes, he's the head coach of the Dallas Renegades. He's also the GM of that franchise. But I think Florida State is a lucrative enough job with a similar winning tradition like Oklahoma. FSU is still in every way, shape, and form a premier location to be a head coach at.
No doubt.
But because of what's going on right now, you have to have a guy that's willing to stick around and rebuild the program. But that's kind of a blessing in disguise because, you're not walking into an established winning culture right now, which is a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, it's going to be hard to get wins, but on the other hand, you can build the program into what you want it to be. So you're kind of getting a chance to really shape the future of an elite-level program, because that's what Florida State's going to be at the end of the day. Sooner or later, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And Bob Stoops is definitely a guy that can do that. I think another interesting conversation to be had regarding Stoops is his brother, Mark Stoops.
I was going there next, yeah. Yeah, I think that's another interesting one. So, we have two shots of there being a Stoops at the helm. I think he's a very interesting one. What he's done with Kentucky has been nothing short of impressive. That is a team that has not, had any level of success in a long time, and they're winning bowl games. They have first-round draft picks. I think when you talk about Stoops, a lot of people are thinking Bob, but, Mark might very well be the way to go.
Yeah, and he stayed in the college game. He knows the territory. Bob probably still does too. He only retired a couple seasons ago. But if you want a guy that has a past of being a coach at Florida State, knowing how to recruit the state of Florida and bringing in elite-level defensive talent there, Mark Stoops is the way to go. I mean, Kentucky used to be an absolute joke of a team. And under Mark Stoops now, they're anything but a joke. They're not having a great season right now, but it's Kentucky. And Mark Stoops is a good coach. He's a great guy. but it is hard at a program like Kentucky, playing in the SEC, no less, to keep winning 8, 9, 10 games a season. It's just too tough of a conference to do that for a program that isn't named LSU, Alabama, or Florida. But I think you come to Florida State, you already know what it's like to coach there. You already coached an elite-level defense for a few years and recruited the best defensive talent probably to ever be on that team, considering all of his recruits wound up in the NFL. Jalen Ramsey comes to mind, DeMarcus Christmas, all those guys. And you consider that fact, and all of a sudden, Mark Stoops seems like a guy you want to go to because, one, you have more money than Kentucky. That's a given. You're also in a recruiting hotbed. You're going to have an easier time getting kids to that school, and you already know the territory. The thing that's going to come down to it is, Stoops is already in the middle of a not great season. He's at 500 right now. If he wins a couple more games this season, it looks better for FSU to hire him. I still think he's going to be a good hire either way. You're definitely not going to get a Willie Taggart repeat out of Mark Stoops. He's just proven that he's got what it takes to win in the Power 5 level.
Yeah, I don't think, going 500 at Kentucky is way more commendable than, somewhere else. And, one thing to mention for either of the Stoops brothers, I think other than Bob, who is currently 59, they're not looking for an older, like I said, Bob is the number one candidate from what I understand, Bob Stoops. Aside, they want someone on the younger end of it. Mark Stoops, he's 52, he kind of still is in that realm. But I think you also look places like, P.J. Fleck at Minnesota and some of these, American Conference, for some, sadly, it becomes a poaching area for Power 5, in quotes, schools, like the coach at Memphis and SMU are having great years right now. So really there's two avenues they can go. They can go for that, the older, more experienced coach that's been there and done that. And at some point, though, you will need to, kind of go the youth route. Like, if it becomes Bob Stoops, they might have to set up, like, a coach-in-waiting situation. Because let's say you get Bob Stoops. How many years do you really get? Do you get 5? I'd be shocked if he gets 5 years out of him.
Yeah, that's a fair point to make. And that's something that has been brought up in the overall conversation of things is Bob Stoops, hypothetically speaking, he comes in and he stabilizes Florida State, gets them back to winning the majority of their games and going to highly rated bowl games. And maybe even a few years he has that team winning 10-11 solidly. But at his age, you wonder how much time he's got left. He's coached a lot of football, and he may not want to be around in it for that long. And the FSU administration might not want him to be around that long, but I can see them leaning that way just because they need an immediate stabilizing winning factor, and Bob Stoops would be it. But the one advantage that you'd have is that Bob Stoops and current FSU offensive coordinator Kendall Briles are already good friends. And the administration has already said that they would want to keep Kendall Briles on the offensive staff as the offensive coordinator. So you could be looking at another Lincoln Riley, Bob Stoops situation where Stoops groomed his offensive coordinator to take over the program, and Lincoln Riley is absolutely obliterating everybody but Kansas State right now this season.
Yeah, the thing with those coaches in waiting thing, obviously you'd have to, for Bob Stoops it makes sense because they do have a relationship there, but if you hire just about everybody else, one of the biggest things about hiring a coach is they want their guys, they want their staff. So if you are, interviewing these coaches saying, this is the job, but, this coordinator stays or this guy stays, it could turn off some people or at least, limit the search that much more. I understand how much they want to keep the offensive coordinator, but if it comes down to another high-end guy and keeping him, they might have to let him go just so they can get the guy at the helm if they want. Or if they're that high on the guy, you could maybe, I see this as a worst-case scenario where he just gets promoted because, no one else would take the job, not allowing to bring in their own coordinators.
Yeah, and that's kind of a dangerous situation. So, if FSU is going to retain Kendall Briles and also Randy Clemens, I think that's kind of putting some pressure on FSU to keep them because they've been a package deal wherever they've gone. You don't get one without the other. And they work well together. I mean, they've proven it. I mean, even with FSU's offensive struggles continuing into this year, they're still a better offense overall this year than they were last year. They're better in just about every category. And again, I still think the offensive line is the biggest piece of that puzzle holding them back. You know, we can do more on that later. But if you're looking at getting good cohesion out of your coaching group, you either A, have to get a guy that's going to mesh well with Kendall Briles or will, at the very least, doesn't mind Kendall Briles as the offensive coordinator. Or you have to, I mean, if you're not going to retain him, the guy you bring in as head coach has to be somebody of, you know, Urban Meyer, Bob Stoops caliber, where they know how to put together winning staffs and winning teams already. But then again, like I said, I don't think Bob Stoops would have a problem keeping Briles on staff. The other question is who do they bring in for their other positions? We already have Jim Leavitt, who was the former defensive coordinator for Oregon, got them playing very well on the defensive side of the ball, and who happens to be the former head coach at USF, and he had pretty good success there. He won overall, I think he had like a 66% win rate there. So, you know, he's, again, on the older side. I think he's in his mid-50s. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think, but he's like around 52, 55, somewhere in that area.
Right.
But he's had success coaching at lower Division I schools, got USF winning most of its games, and again coached a top 20 or top 15 defense at Oregon, which is something they haven't had in a long time. They've always been known as, you know, one of the best offensive teams in the country, but they were more willing to get into shootouts with teams because they could usually beat the other guy in terms of points. But then when they got Jim Leavitt in there, it's like, okay, all of a sudden you have an elite level offense that's being complemented by a very solid defense. And I'm surprised his name hasn't really been tossed into the head coaching conversation, only because he has the experience and he has experience winning a good amount of games for a while at a location, at a single school. Something Taggart just didn't have. He never built a resume at one school where he had consistently winning teams after he turned them around. And I think that ultimately hurt him. Oh, and one thing I wanted to add real quick. You mentioned PJ Fleck. It was just announced a couple of hours ago, as it turns out, that he's signed a new contract with the Golden Gophers through the end of 2026. I don't know any of the details. I just saw the headlines, so I know he was there, but we were talking about him as a possible replacement. So, you know, the search continues, and I guess we'll probably be finding out in the coming weeks which direction Florida State chooses to go.
No matter who they end up picking, one thing that will be certain is other than Stoops, again, I think he's the exception of everything we're talking about here, but otherwise they want a guy who's going to be there for the long haul. You know, after having Bobby Bowden as long as they did, they definitely expected to have Jimbo Fisher longer than they did, and they obviously thought Taggart would work out more than a season and a half. So I do think it will be interesting to see who they pick. I'm curious if I think the pick is going to be made within a week or two. They might play a game or two, you know, with this interim situation. But whoever it is, obviously, Rich, we'll have you back on to discuss that. But otherwise, good stuff, man. I appreciate having you.
Thanks again for having me, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
All right, that's going to wrap up this episode. I want to thank you all for listening. I want to thank Richard again for taking the time to be on. It took one text to be like, hey, man, we need to know your opinion of all this, and I was able to get some of his time. He's pretty busy out there doing his thing in Tampa, so I appreciate it, and I'm sure I'll have him again soon when we get the decision on who the next Florida State coach will be. It'll be pretty interesting, I'm sure. So I want to thank you all for listening. Give me a follow on Twitter at Phil Talk Sports. All these episodes are on my YouTube channel. Just search Phil Talk Sports on YouTube, and you'll find them all. There's a playlist for you, so you can catch up on past ones. Give me a follow, give me a subscribe if you think it's worth it, and have a good one. I appreciate it.
Savior, but I'm not asking for favors. My whole life I feel like a burden. I think too much and I hate